The keys felt heavier than they should have. 40 acres of limestone and scrub pine, a century-old farmhouse with good bones and bad plumbing, and a quarry that hadn't seen a work crew since my grandfather sold the last load of stone in 1987. My father had kept the property taxes paid and the driveway graded, but he'd stopped visiting years before he died. When the estate lawyer handed me the deed, he said something about the land being quiet now, as if that were a comfort. I drove out on a Saturday in April 2019, 3 months after the funeral. The farmhouse stood where I remembered it. White paint peeling, porch sagging on the north corner, windows intact. I'd spent summers here as a kid, back when my grandfather still lived in the place. He used to walk me down to the quarry edge and point out the limestone layers, explaining how the earth kept records, if you knew how to read them. The quarry itself lay a quarter mile past the house, accessible by an old equipment road that had gone to gravel and weeds. I parked at the rim and walked to the edge. The pit had filled with groundwater over the decades, creating a small lake maybe 200 feet across. The water looked clear near the surface, that particular blue-green that comes from limestone. Peaceful, quiet, like the lawyer said. Then I saw the refrigerator. It sat half submerged near the eastern bank, white enamel streaked with rust. Next to it, a pile of broken concrete. Beyond that, what looked like sections of chain-link fence, twisted playground equipment, and a scatter of asphalt chunks. I walked the rim. The south side was worse. Mounds of construction debris, splintered lumber, rolls of old carpet, plastic piping, and at least a dozen garbage bags split open and spilling their contents. Someone had been using my property as a dump. I found the access road on the second pass around the rim. Fresh gravel, recent grading, tire tracks still visible in the soft earth near the quarry edge. The road cut through my fence line, or where my fence line should have been, and disappeared into the tree line toward the adjacent property. I knew what lay in that direction. The Meadowbrook Estates HOA 200 homes on what used to be the old Schaefer farm, developed in the early 2000s when the county rezoned for residential. I'd never paid much attention to the community, hadn't needed to. I pulled out my phone and started taking pictures. The refrigerator, the concrete, the access road, the tire tracks. I documented everything I could see from the rim, then made my way carefully down the old quarry service path to get closer shots of the debris. Some of it looked recent, lumber that hadn't weathered yet, garbage bags that hadn't fully deteriorated. Some looked older, years older. At the bottom, near the water's edge, I found a broken playground slide, the plastic faded but still bearing a manufacturer's label. Behind it, a stack of asphalt millings that had to weigh several tons. This wasn't casual dumping. This wasn't someone tossing a couch they didn't want to haul to the landfill. This was systematic, organized, repeated. I climbed back to the rim and stood there as the sun dropped toward the tree line. The property had been quiet, all right. Quiet enough that no one noticed what was happening to it. Quiet enough that someone decided it was convenient. My grandfather used to say that limestone was patient. It took its time, built itself layer by layer, and when you finally broke it open, you found the truth of what had been laid down. I looked at the debris field below, at the access road cutting through my land, at the tire tracks still fresh in the dirt. Someone had made a serious mistake. They just didn't know it yet. The environmental survey team arrived 3 days after I'd secured the property line. I watched from the access road as they unloaded ground-penetrating radar equipment, water testing kits, and what looked like enough documentation supplies to catalogue a small war. Dr. Sarah Chen, the lead environmental engineer, walked the perimeter first. She didn't speak much, just photographed, measured, made notes in a battered field journal that she kept returning to like it contained answers she didn't want to find. "How deep does this go?" she asked, standing at the quarry's edge. 120 feet at the center. Water starts about 40 feet down. She wrote that down. Then she looked at the massive pile of debris the HOA had left near the eastern access point, the one they'd cut through my fence line, without permission. Construction lumber, shingles, what appeared to be an entire kitchen's worth of cabinets, still attached to sections of drywall. "This is recent," she said. "2 weeks ago. I have it on camera." Her expression didn't change, but something shifted in how she held her pen. "We're going to be here a while." The survey took 11 days. I watched them core soil samples, test water at multiple depths, use drones to map the full extent of the dumping. They brought in a small excavator to dig test trenches through the waste piles. Every day, the preliminary findings got worse. Chen called me on day 7. "We found electronics, monitors, old computers, what looks like commercial kitchen equipment. That means heavy metals in the groundwater. Mercury, lead, cadmium. How bad? Bad enough that I'm required to report it to the state EPA. This isn't just trespassing anymore. This is hazardous waste disposal without a permit." The final report arrived as a bound document, 247 pages. I sat in my truck and read it cover to cover in the Quarry parking area, watching the sun set over what used to be clean limestone and clear water. The executive summary was clinical. Approximately 2,400 tons of mixed waste material. Contamination of groundwater exceeding safe levels for 6 different compounds. Soil contamination extending roughly 30 feet from the primary dump sites. Estimated cleanup cost, $1.2 to $1.8 million, depending on remediation method selected. But it was the appendices that made my hands shake. Photographs cataloging every type of waste they'd found. Asphalt chunks with the HOA's street name still visible on the surface. Playground equipment with the community logo stamped into the metal. A broken pool filter housing with a maintenance tag dated 18 months prior. They hadn't even tried to hide what they were doing. I called my attorney that night. Marcus Webb had handled my family's property disputes for 20 years, but I'd never heard his voice go that cold. "They documented their own crime," he said after I read him the key findings. "The waste has their identification on it. The contamination is measurable and tied directly to their materials. And you have video of them continuing to dump after you posted no trespassing signs." What's next? I'm filing with the EPA tomorrow. Criminal referral. Then we're going after them civilly for every dollar of cleanup, every dollar of property value loss, and punitive damages for knowing willful environmental destruction. He paused. "How much do you want to make them hurt?" I thought about 15 years of my family's property being used as a garbage dump, about the groundwater my grandfather used to say was clean enough to drink, about the arrogance it took to keep dumping even after I'd caught them. "All of it," I said. "I want all of it." The attorney's office smelled like leather and old paper. Marcus Webb didn't look like someone who'd spent 20 years fighting environmental cases. No dramatic courtroom posturing. No expensive suit that screamed litigation. He wore khakis and a button-down with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, and when he spread the surveyor's preliminary photos across his conference table, his hands moved with the precision of a surgeon. "This is worse than you think," he said. I'd called him because his name kept appearing in state EPA enforcement actions. The retainer was $15,000. I wrote the check the same afternoon I received the surveyor's initial report. Now, 3 weeks later, we had the full environmental assessment. $28,000 for a document that read like an indictment. Marcus turned to page 47. Approximately 2,400 tons of waste material. Construction debris, treated lumber, asphalt containing coal tar sealants, electronics with heavy metals leaching into your groundwater. He looked up. They've contaminated an aquifer that feeds into the county water table. The number hit differently when someone else said it aloud. 2,400 tons. 15 years of systematic dumping, documented in soil samples and water tests and photographic evidence that showed the layers of waste like geological strata. Cleanup cost: between 1.2 and 1.8 million. Depends on how deep the contamination goes. He flipped to another section. But that's not your problem, that's theirs. The demand letter went out on a Tuesday. Certified mail, return receipt requested. Immediate cessation of all dumping activity. Full environmental remediation at HOA expense. 500,000 in damages for trespass and property devaluation. Legal fees. A timeline of 30 days to respond. I installed the security cameras on Wednesday. 4 cameras. Motion activated, covering the access road they'd carved through the tree line. High resolution, night vision, cloud backup. The installer asked if I was expecting trouble. I told him I was expecting documentation. On Friday, they came back. The footage was perfect. A white pickup truck with an HOA maintenance logo on the door. 2 men in the cab. The bed loaded with broken concrete and what looked like old deck boards. They drove straight down their unauthorized road, backed up to the edge of the quarry, and dumped everything over the side. 17 minutes from arrival to departure. They didn't look around. They didn't hesitate. They'd done this so many times it had become routine. Marcus filed the complaint with the State Environmental Agency the following Monday. The EPA got a copy on Tuesday. By Thursday, I had case numbers and confirmation that both agencies had opened investigations. The HOA's response arrived on day 28 of the 30-day deadline. Their attorney's letter was 3 pages of deflection. The property appeared abandoned. Previous owners had never objected. The HOA had been providing a community service by preventing the quarry from becoming a public hazard. There was no evidence of intentional wrongdoing. The final paragraph suggested I was attempting to exploit a good faith misunderstanding for financial gain. Marcus read it twice, then set it down on his desk with the careful control of someone choosing not to crumple it into a ball. "They're going to fight this," he said. "Can they win?" "No." He pulled out a yellow legal pad and began writing. "But they can make it expensive and slow. They'll claim adverse possession, argue about property line disputes, challenge the environmental assessment methodology, demand their own testing." He looked up. "This is going to trial, and we're going to need everything." The lawsuit was filed in county court 6 weeks after I'd first walked onto my property and seen what they'd done to it: trespass, illegal dumping, environmental damage, nuisance, punitive damages. The number we put in the complaint was $7.5 million. Marcus said to ask for more than we expected to get. I told him the number felt about right. The HOA's response arrived 3 weeks after my demand letter, delivered by a lawyer whose letterhead listed an address in a glass tower downtown. I opened it standing in my kitchen, still wearing work boots caked with quarry mud from another site inspection. The tone was immediate, dismissive, almost bored. They denied everything that mattered, denied knowledge of ownership boundaries, denied intent, denied that the dumping constituted environmental damage worth discussing. The letter referenced alleged trespass and purported contamination, as though my photographs and environmental survey were creative fiction. Their position, stripped of legal language, prove it. More specifically, prove it was worth what I was asking. The board president's affidavit came attached. Patricia Hendricks, 30-year resident, former school administrator. She'd signed a statement claiming the quarry had appeared abandoned for decades, that no signage indicated private ownership, that the HOA had actually performed a community service by preventing the site from becoming a haven for transients and criminal activity. She'd written that last part herself. I could tell. The lawyer's prose was smooth. Hers had the clipped certainty of someone used to being right by virtue of position. The affidavit never mentioned the meeting minutes, never mentioned the budget line items, never mentioned the emails my attorney had specifically referenced in the demand letter. It was a dare disguised as a defense. My attorney called that afternoon. Her voice carried the particular flatness that meant she was angry, but wouldn't waste energy showing it. "They're betting you'll settle for cleanup costs," she said. "They think the environmental damage claim is inflated. They think a jury won't award punitive damages for dumping trash." What do you think? I think they don't know what we found in discovery yet. She was right. We'd filed the lawsuit 2 days after their response. Standard procedure, complaint, then discovery. They'd answered our demand letter before seeing the evidence we'd already compiled. The HOA's formal answer to the lawsuit arrived 6 weeks later. Same lawyer, same tone. They admitted to limited disposal of community maintenance materials, but characterized it as reasonable use of what they termed apparently unused land. Their counterclaim accused me of creating a private nuisance by allowing the quarry to fill with water and become an attractive nuisance that endangered neighborhood children. I read that twice. They were arguing I was liable for not securing a hole they'd been filling with garbage. The deposition schedule came next. They wanted to depose me first. Standard intimidation. Make the plaintiff sit in a conference room for 8 hours, answering questions designed to find inconsistencies, admissions, anything usable. I spent 4 days preparing. My attorney walked me through every document, every photograph, every invoice. She explained how their lawyer would try to make me angry, try to get me to speculate, try to get me to say something, anything that contradicted the written record. "They're going to ask if you ever gave anyone permission to access the property," she said. "The answer is no. Not that I remember. Not I don't think so. No." The deposition took place in a conference room that smelled like recycled air and expensive furniture polish. The HOA's attorney was younger than I expected, mid-30s, confident in the way people are when they've never lost badly enough to learn caution. He asked his questions. I answered them. He tried to establish that I'd neglected the property, that I'd never posted no trespassing signs, that I couldn't prove the dumping had caused quantifiable harm. I watched him work through his outline, watched him check boxes on his legal pad, watched him lean back when he finished, satisfied he'd established enough ambiguity to make my case expensive to prove. He hadn't seen the meeting minutes yet, hadn't seen the emails, hadn't seen the budget documents showing exactly how much money the board had saved by using my land as their private landfill. Discovery was about to change everything. The discovery process began like most legal excavations, tedious, methodical, and initially unremarkable. My attorney, Patricia Chen, had requested all HOA board meeting minutes, financial records, and correspondence dating back 17 years. What arrived 3 weeks later, delivered in 4 bankers' boxes by a visibly nervous paralegal, would dismantle every defense the Ridgemont Estates Board had constructed. Patricia called me at 7 in the morning. She never called that early. "You need to come to the office, now." I found her in the conference room, documents spread across 12 feet of mahogany table like evidence at a crime scene, which, as it turned out, was exactly what they were. "They kept everything," she said, sliding a bound volume of meeting minutes toward me. Every conversation, every decision, every calculation of how much money they were saving. The minutes from April 2006 contained the original discussion. Board President Howard Vance had proposed utilizing the adjacent quarry property for community waste disposal as a cost-saving measure. The motion passed 4-1. The single dissenting vote came from a board member who resigned 2 months later, a detail that suddenly felt significant. But the minutes were just the foundation. The financial records told the real story. For 15 years, the HOA had maintained a budget line item labeled Waste Management, Quarry Site. Homeowners had been paying $43 per month, every month, for disposal services the HOA never actually purchased. The legitimate waste management contract they'd cancelled in 2006 would have cost $68 per household monthly. The difference, multiplied across 156 homes over 15 years, represented pure profit absorbed into the HOA's operating budget. Patricia had already done the math. $384,000. That's what they saved by dumping on your property, instead of paying for legal disposal. The email chains were worse, much worse. In 2011, a new board member had questioned the Quarry arrangement. Howard Vance's response, preserved forever in the HOA's server backup, was remarkably candid. The property appears abandoned. Previous ownership never raised concerns. Even if the current owner eventually discovers our usage, the cost of any potential cleanup would likely be less than what we've already saved. The risk-benefit analysis favors continuation. Risk-benefit analysis. He'd actually written those words. There were other emails. A 2014 exchange about expanding the dumping to include construction debris from major renovations. A 2016 discussion about whether to inform new board members of the Quarry arrangement or maintain plausible deniability. A 2018 message where the treasurer calculated they'd need to budget for cleanup if and when we're caught, estimating costs at $400,000. Maximum. They'd known. They'd always known. And they'd made a calculated decision that my property, my inheritance, my family's land was worth less than their budget surplus. Patricia was building something on her laptop, her fingers moving with the rapid precision of someone who'd found exactly what they needed. This isn't just trespass anymore. This is fraud. They billed homeowners for services they didn't provide. They knowingly contaminated private property. They discussed the illegality and chose to continue. She turned the screen toward me. The draft complaint had grown from 8 pages to 43. We're adding RICO predicates, pattern of fraud, conspiracy. We're piercing the corporate veil and going after the board members personally. She looked up, and something in her expression had shifted from professional satisfaction to something harder. We're also notifying the State Attorney General. These people didn't just trespass. They ran a 15-year criminal enterprise and charged your neighbors for the privilege. The bankers' boxes sat silent against the wall, packed with the complete documentation of their arrogance. Every meeting, every vote, every email where they'd congratulated themselves on their fiscal responsibility. They'd kept everything, and everything would bury them. The settlement conference was scheduled for 9 in the morning on a Tuesday in March. Richard had warned me that these things could go one of two ways: quick capitulation or drawn-out posturing that accomplished nothing. The HOA's insurance carrier had requested the meeting, which he said was a good sign. Insurance companies don't waste time on fights they know they'll lose. We met in a conference room at the mediator's office, a neutral space with bland corporate art and a table long enough to seat 12. The HOA brought 6 people: their attorney, 2 insurance representatives, the board president, the treasurer, and someone Richard identified as their environmental liability specialist. They looked like they'd already lost. The mediator opened with the standard speech about good faith negotiation and the benefits of avoiding trial. Then Richard laid out our position. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The evidence is overwhelming. We have documented proof of intentional, systematic, illegal dumping spanning 15 years. We have meeting minutes showing knowledge. We have budget documents showing financial benefit. We have emails discussing the cost-benefit analysis of getting caught. He slid a bound document across the table. This is our damages calculation: environmental remediation, property damage, loss of use, and punitive damages. We're prepared to present this to a jury. The insurance representative, a woman in her 50s with reading glasses on a chain, opened the document. Her face didn't change, but I watched her finger tap twice against the table. She conferred quietly with her colleague, then with the HOA's attorney. "We'd like to caucus," she said. They left the room. Richard poured himself water from the pitcher on the credenza and checked his phone. I sat very still, trying not to let hope or anger cloud what was happening. This was procedure. This was the machinery of justice turning at its own pace. 40 minutes later, they returned. The insurance representative spoke first. "We're prepared to make an offer that includes full environmental remediation, property restoration, and a cash settlement. We're also prepared to agree to a permanent injunction and coverage of plaintiff's legal fees." Richard waited. $7.2 million, all inclusive. $1.6 million allocated specifically for environmental cleanup, supervised by a third-party contractor. The remainder for damages, restoration, and fees. Payment within 30 days of signed agreement. I felt the number land in my chest like a physical thing. $7.2 million. More than we'd asked for. More than I'd imagined possible when I first saw those piles of construction debris filling my family's quarry. Richard made them wait 15 seconds before responding. "We'll need to review the specific terms of the remediation protocol and the injunction language, and we'll need confirmation of how the HOA intends to fund their portion." The HOA's attorney cleared his throat. He looked like he'd aged 5 years since the deposition. "The insurance policy covers up to $5 million. The remaining amount will be covered by a special assessment on all homeowner units, 156 homes, approximately $35,000 per household." I watched the board president's face. He was staring at the table, jaw clenched, the muscles in his neck tight. He'd sent that email. "Even if the owner finds out, the cleanup cost will be less than what we've saved." He'd been wrong by a factor of 4. "We'll need 2 hours to review," Richard said. We caucused in a smaller room down the hall. Richard went through the settlement term sheet line by line, explaining what each clause meant, what protections it gave us, what we might negotiate further. But the number was real. The cleanup was guaranteed. The injunction was permanent. "This is a good offer," he said finally. "It's a winning offer, but it's your decision." I thought about my grandfather, who'd worked that quarry for 30 years. I thought about 15 years of illegal dumping, of casual theft disguised as community service. "Accept it," I said. The settlement documents arrived on a Thursday morning, and by Thursday afternoon, the HOA's world had begun its collapse. The insurance company's representative delivered the news to the board in a closed emergency session. $7.2 million. The number sat in the room like a physical presence, too large to be absorbed, too devastating to be real. The policy would cover $5 million. The remaining $2.2 million, plus all associated costs, would fall directly on the homeowners. 156 families. The math was simple and brutal. Within hours, the board president sent the required notice to all residents. Special assessment. $35,000 per household. Due within 90 days, with payment plans available for those who could prove financial hardship. The email was 2 paragraphs long. No explanation of how this had happened. No apology. Just the number and the deadline. The community Facebook group exploded first. Then the phone calls started. Then families began appearing at board members' homes, demanding answers that nobody wanted to give. By Friday morning, someone had leaked the meeting minutes. All of them. 15 years of documentation, including every email chain, every budget discussion, every casual mention of the quarry site, as if it were just another line item between landscaping and pool maintenance. The residents learned they'd been charged disposal fees for years. Fees that went into the general fund while their waste went onto someone else's property. Fees that saved the board money, kept assessments low, and made the community's finances look responsible and well managed. They learned their board had known, had discussed it, had calculated the risk, and decided it was worth taking. The board president's house was egged Saturday night. By Sunday, all 7 board members had submitted resignation letters, effective immediately. Not because they wanted to, because their attorney told them it was the only way to separate themselves from the personal liability that was already forming on the horizon. The homeowners weren't satisfied with resignations. 3 families filed suit against the former board members personally, alleging gross negligence and breach of fiduciary duty. The special assessment, they argued, was a direct result of illegal actions taken for personal benefit. The board members had enjoyed the same low HOA fees as everyone else while creating a $7 million liability. The State Attorney General's office announced criminal charges on a Tuesday: illegal dumping, fraud, environmental crimes. The board president and treasurer were named specifically. Arraignment scheduled for the following month. Property values began their slide almost immediately. 2 homes went on the market the first week, then 5 more, then 12. Every listing had the same problem. Buyers' attorneys found the lawsuit, found the settlement, found the special assessment during due diligence. Offers came in 15% below asking, then 20%. Sellers who'd planned to move found themselves trapped, unable to sell without taking catastrophic losses, unable to stay without paying the assessment. The new interim board, elected in an emergency meeting that felt more like a wake, had to make impossible choices. They could allow payment plans, but that meant the cleanup would be delayed and the legal fees would continue mounting. They could demand immediate payment, but that meant foreclosures, which would devastate property values even further. They chose a hybrid approach that satisfied no one. By the end of the first month, 3 families had declared bankruptcy. 2 more had moved out and simply stopped paying their mortgages, willing to accept foreclosure rather than pay $35,000 on top of everything else. The community pool sat empty because nobody had approved the seasonal maintenance contract. The landscaping went brown in the summer heat because the crew hadn't been paid in 6 weeks. The neighborhood that had prided itself on pristine appearances and responsible governance had become a cautionary tale. Its streets lined with for sale signs and its residents bound together only by shared financial ruin and the knowledge that their own board had sold them out for the cost of proper waste disposal. The cleanup crews left on a Thursday morning in late October, their trucks rolling down the access road one final time before the gate, my gate, swung shut behind them. 14 months. That's how long it took to undo what the HOA had spent 15 years creating. I stood at the edge of what used to be a dumping ground and watched the last truck disappear around the bend. The quarry didn't look like it had before the dumping started. It looked better. The remediation team had done more than remove waste. They'd stabilized the limestone banks with native plantings, installed proper drainage systems to protect the groundwater, and restored the natural filtration that had been compromised by years of chemical leaching. The water in the quarry lake ran clear now, tested monthly by the environmental monitoring company. The settlement required the HOA to pay for. For the next 10 years, they'd keep testing. For the next 10 years, they'd keep paying. I walked the perimeter fence that hadn't existed 6 months ago. 8 feet of commercial-grade steel with 3 strands of barbed wire angled outward at the top. The gate system cost $40,000 alone. Card access, cameras, motion sensors. Nothing came onto this property without me knowing about it. The nature preserve took shape slowly through that first autumn. I'd hired a landscape architect who specialized in ecological restoration, and she'd mapped out a plan that worked with the land rather than against it. Native grasses along the southern slope. A pollinator meadow where the old access road used to cut through. Interpretive signs explaining the geology of the quarry. The history of limestone extraction in the region. The process of natural succession when industrial sites return to wilderness. It would open to the public in the spring. Limited access. Guided tours only. Educational focus. The trust I'd established would manage it in perpetuity, funded by a portion of the settlement that would generate enough income to maintain the property and pay a small staff. My family's quarry would become something the community could actually use. The community beyond the HOA's gates. The people who hadn't spent 15 years treating my land like their personal landfill. The HOA itself barely existed anymore in any meaningful sense. The special assessment had triggered a wave of sales. 43 homes had changed hands in the past year, most of them at significant losses. The new board, entirely different people, none of whom had served during the dumping years, spent their time managing the financial crisis and fielding lawsuits from homeowners who wanted someone to blame for their $35,000 bills. I didn't attend the criminal sentencing hearing for the former board president and treasurer. My attorney went and called me afterward with the results. 18 months for the president, 12 for the treasurer, both followed by probation and restitution orders they'd probably spend the rest of their lives paying off. The restitution wouldn't come to me. It would go to their former neighbors, the people they'd betrayed when they chose savings over honesty. On my last walk around the property before winter set in, I found myself standing at the exact spot where I'd first seen the dumping. The broken playground equipment, the construction debris, the casual disregard for law and property and basic human decency. Nothing remained of it now except memory and documentation, and a $7.2 million settlement that had rebuilt what they'd destroyed and punished those who'd profited from the destruction. The quarry lake reflected the November sky, grey and clear and cold. My grandfather had worked this stone. My father had watched it fill with water. I would watch it become something new, something protected, preserved, and finally, permanently mine. The gate locked behind me with a solid mechanical click. No one was getting in without permission. Not anymore. Not ever again.